So, welcome everyone to MedTech Easy's podcast. My name is Harmina, and I'm the medical representative at MTE, MedTech Easy.
Hi, and I'm Ravant, and I'm the founder and president currently of OSCEASY, the overarching organization.
Cool. So, just a little bit about MTE. It's a newly founded branch of OSCEASY, and our main aim is to bridge the gap between medical students and the rapidly evolving world of medical technology. We primarily aim to do this through educating our members with our teaching series and this podcast. So I'm very delighted to welcome a special guest, Dr. James Somauroo, to the podcast today. James is the co-founder of SOMX, a public relations and communications agency within the field of health tech and biotech. James is also the editor-in-chief of HEALTHTECH Pigeon, a weekly newsletter, host of the HealthTech podcast, and also a writer for Forbes magazine as a contributor about health tech, startup, innovation. So as you can tell, James is a fantastic example of how you can start your career as a medical student and then go on to become a doctor and explore healthcare in other capacities. So thank you so much, James, for coming on to the podcast today. Both Ravant and I and all of our listeners are probably really excited to talk to you today and hear your views about health tech. I guess my first question, something that everyone would be really interested to know, is how did you start your journey onto where you are today, and what sort of motivated you to explore career paths other than the linear training program within medicine? Like, what first steps did you take?
Cool, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so my journey starts, I guess. So I was a distracted medical student. That's probably the best way to put it. I was always interested in other things. I never loved the medicine, in all honesty. I just sort of got used to the fact that you weren't meant to enjoy the thing that you did 9 till 5 or whatever else you tend to do. But I guess I was used to that, and I always used to look for other things to do that would, I guess, fulfill me. And so in medical school, it was lots of stuff. It was sport, it was music, it was going out with friends, it was all that sort of stuff that was bringing me joy rather than the course itself. But I'd never really saw it as a red flag or anything, because I was interested in it enough, and I was very proud to be a medical student. I really enjoyed being one. Certainly telling family and things that I was on, always pretty good to make them proud. But yeah, I get, when I graduated from medical school and I was an F1, my first job was liaison psychiatry, which wasn't a hectic medical on-call like type job. It was relatively chill. And so it gave me a lot of time. And with that time, I guess I learned to, I say learn, what I enjoyed was just speaking to other F1s and figuring out what the problems were in the hospital that I could solve with my time, basically. And that led me into the world of quality improvement. And so the big thing for me in my career was this QI stuff. And the way I saw it was that, yes, we could all in the hospital spend goodness knows how many hours and extra hours treating patients. But if we can fix a little bit of the system that allows us all to see more patients, or allows patients to get treatment better or quicker, or flow through the hospital better, or indeed even things that would just give staff a bit more time or whatever it was, I could almost feel palpably the difference that would make. So the first thing that I fixed as an F1 was a printer, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but we had a whole floor basically with just one printer on it, and that's where the doctor's mess was. And you have to go and print your lists. You know, as a fifth year, you'll know this. You're going to print your list first thing in the morning to do your ward round, and you know, it's 4 or 5 sides of paper. If it prints one-sided, you're there for quite a while. But now imagine there's 25, 30 F1s that are trying to do that against one printer. All of a sudden, ward rounds are starting late, they're finishing late. People are getting delayed with their treatments, investigations, next steps, feeding, all these things that get delayed and have these knock-on effects that you just might not realize. Like that, you wouldn't realize it unless you'd seen it and lived it, that when You fix a couple of other printers in the doctor's mess, all of a sudden there's no queue to print first thing in the morning. All the ward rounds start on time. All those F1s are far less stressed. They don't need to get in quite as early. There's all these interesting knock-on effects. And then obviously the ward rounds that finish on time, people's investigations get done better, patients are fed earlier. And so it became quite addictive to look at the system and go, like, for a little bit of effort, you can make a lot of difference. And there's a lot of this kind of low-hanging fruit. Not that I want to use too much jargon on this, but yeah, there was a lot of that, I guess, to do. And the next thing I took on was we had loads of discharge summaries to do as an F1. And I did the most because I was on MAU at the time. So I was doing loads and loads of discharge summaries. But it was a really unwieldy system. It was a computer that would take ages to switch on. It was a program that would take ages to load. It was loads of information you needed to put in for literally no reason. And so people would put off doing discharge summaries and they'd pile up in the mess. And so I put together like a focus group of like a GP, because lo and behold, who does this actually go to? Who cares? Well, it's a GP. So what does the GP actually want and need? Well, turns out they only need a white space text box with just what happened. You don't need to sit and type all the blood results and all the other stuff that we were doing. So that's all they needed. And then someone from IT, some consultants from the hospital, but crucially some F1s that were doing all this stuff, and FTs as well. And together we just sort of solved that problem basically. And we just had a new system, which was just a white space answer. And I did some other stuff for like VTE and thromboprophylaxis and forms that would just make sure all that stuff go quicker. And as I say, it just sort of spiraled from there. The thing that kind of really solidified it for me in terms of maybe my destiny is outside of clinical medicine was when I did a project where I was on neonates as an F2. And I used to do this ward round called special care, which I used to do on a Friday. And it would be all the women who'd just given birth, but their baby had suspected sepsis. So you get blood cultures done. If they're negative, you go home in 48 hours. But it was never 48 hours. It was 50 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours. And it was just, you'd log onto the computer for the result. It wouldn't be there. So I followed a blood test around the hospital to just be like, what happens to this thing? Like, where does it go? Like, who looks at it? Does it go in like a microwave? Does it go in like an agar plate? Like, what the hell happens to this thing? So I just followed a blood test, a blood culture, and learned where it went, spoke to the people in the lab and said, why did this patient get it in 48 hours, but this one, it was 70? What was the difference between these two? And it was like, well, this one got taken out of hours. This got taken overnight. And therefore, what happens is it goes in the pod, it drops in the lab, but at 5:01 p.m., that drops at the bottom of the basket. Then the blood's from 5:02, 5:03, 5:04, 5:00, and then all the bloods build up on top. So whoever got their blood taken at 5:01 was actually the worst off, because then by the time someone's come in the next morning and started picking them off the top, by the time you get to the bottom, that person's last. And so actually, there was this real kind of practical human nature to this problem that needed to be solved. And so what I did was I took some study leave and shadowed someone in finance to figure out how to write a business case. And Linda, her name was, she shadowed me on neonates. I shadowed her in the finance department. And then together we wrote a business case to lease a new blood culture analyzer and put it on the neonates ward, which would save 90K in year one, 200K in year two, that sort of stuff. And that got me in front of the clinical director at the neonates department. It went higher up than that, and just sort of put me on the map. But it was the shadowing of the finance people. So I used to take study leave and just shadow random people in the hospital. So I'd try and shadow the chief exec. That was relatively difficult, but shadowing people in finance, but graduates at my level, and just sort of learning how money moves around this hospital, how you actually make change. And that allowed me to basically, whenever I came across a problem, if I wanted to solve something or fix something, whenever someone said, oh, you can't do that because of finance, it's like, no, I can. I'm fully aware that I can. Or later in my career, no, you can't do that because of policy. No, I spent time in policy. I know you can. So I've always had this real practical nature about me that I never believe what someone tells me if I haven't experienced it myself or without evidence for it myself, because I don't believe that people know things just because, like, do you have direct experience of that, yes or no? And if no, well, I'm going to go and find the information myself then. So I've always had that, I guess you call it an entrepreneurial nature or whatever, inquisitive, curious, stubborn, annoying. I don't know whatever you'd call it. But that's what I did in my early years. And that's kind of how it got me into tech, because actually when you start decoding these problems, you end up finding tech solutions that can solve those problems. And therefore I started to get a network of technology companies that I was helping to get into the hospitals in which I worked to solve various problems. So as part of that, you learn about sales meetings, you learn who buys things in a hospital, you learn what they need to hear. You watch the meetings that go well, you watch the meetings that don't, and you learn something. But ultimately, all of this stuff came down to communications, because whether it's writing a pitch deck, whether it's how to conduct that sales meeting, the questions to ask and the way to answer theirs, like it all really came down to communications. So but anyway, I mean, I left clinical medicine after 5 years. I did F1, F2, took an F3. That was an incredible year. Really, really recommend everyone does that. And then, yeah, 2 years of anesthetics training. And then I was a reg for a couple of weeks and then took my leave after that. But I then went into policy, because policy constantly came up as a barrier for why people couldn't do things. Our policy says this, policy says that. So I learned how to leverage policy. I got on, it was the Bruce Keogh Fellowship then, the National Medical Directors Clinical Fellowship. I got on that, was at HEE, so learned a hell of a lot at HEE that year. But as part of that, you've obviously got different fellows at the CQC and NICE and NHS England and all these different places. So you're learning as a fellowship group, like all about these different organizations in the back end of healthcare, how the whole of the back end of healthcare like links up and how it influences the front line and how the finances work, and learned all of that sort of stuff. And then, yeah, after that, I was looking at my options and I thought I could be like a clinical director at a startup. I could be chief medical officer at a startup. I could be a co-founder. I could do this. I could do that. I could do that. But I've kind of felt in my career that I didn't want to just back one horse at that point, because health tech was still relatively embryonic. So they were launching something called Digital Health London Accelerator. And this is where network becomes incredibly important, because as part of that fellowship group, we had a WhatsApp group between us all. And one of the fellows, Manpreet, her name was, she was at Public Health England, I believe. She posted this job in the WhatsApp group. I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. I applied for it, got it. And then all of a sudden I was at this accelerator where I was helping 30 startups per year get into the NHS and helping them with market access. It was the perfect job for my skill set and what I knew and what I learned. So yeah, started there as something called an NHS navigator. So helping 10 startups navigate the NHS with my knowledge and my skills and my network. And then 6 months later was promoted to run the program with someone called Hannah. Two of us ran that program for a year or so, through cohorts 1 and 2. And then, yeah, I guess I then started my own kind of entrepreneurial journey. So I started my own accelerator after that with a guy called Alex. The two of us started HS, which became HS Ventures. It was a pre-seed accelerator, early stage for individuals to apply to, find a co-founder in health tech, build a company, get funding, all that sort of stuff. So the two of us ran that for a few cohorts. Had a couple of startups in those, raise $1 million plus, which was awesome. And then was at a bit of a crossroads really, and thought we could have taken that accelerator one direction. Alex and I both had loads of other stuff going on. One option was to raise a VC fund, which we started doing. We both sort of fell out of love with the idea, but we both had loads of opportunity in sort of revenue generating businesses. And so actually that becomes incredibly appealing. And as I said, everything that I did was communications. I've always found it easy to be a translator between many different worlds. So the world of clinical medicine, managerial side of healthcare, the financial side of healthcare, the tech side of healthcare. I've always spoken all of those different languages. And so to be in the center of all of that and to help everybody communicate with each other became an incredibly good model for me. And because of the work I was doing with tech companies, helping them get into places, like, again, it just became a clear option to start a communications business for tech companies specifically, because I was already doing that. Now my partner in love and life and crime and now business is Jessica. She was the director at Fleischmann Hillard, which is a big PR company. So she, global PR agency. So she was doing, her clients were medical device companies, massive ones, pharma companies. So yeah, she was already working in healthcare. She knows PR. She knows how to grow an agency. And so the two of us put our heads together and just said, what does a modern communications group for health tech and biotech specifically look like? And it's the mixture of content and PR, more broadly and organically to get their reach and their network and all that sort of stuff. But then actually it's applying our very specific and niche knowledge of the understanding of their audiences to actually get all of that bang on and right. Because someone that wants to get in front of ICSs is very different to someone who wants to get in front of pharma companies and certain job titles in pharma companies and all that sort of stuff. It's all very, very, very nuanced in healthcare and health tech. And so we put our heads together and said, yeah, Jess will do their PR, I'll do their content. And that's how we started from day one. So we've bootstrapped everything. We're now, 11, 12 people, or 20, depending on how you count it, with contractors and part-time and various bits and bobs. We've done all that in the last 2 and a bit years-ish. So yeah, it's gone really quickly. There was clearly a need for it. But that's I guess the shortish version of how it all happened, if anyone's still awake.
No, that's really cool. And I think it's really nice to see how organic it was and how you started off with these quality improvement projects during your F1 and F2, and it just sort of built from there. You mentioned...
I do think on that, actually, just to jump in, I think you can always make a story sound. I mean, I'm in communications, right? Like I've that story, you could be here for days telling that story, and the line would be so up, down, left, right, like it would be all over the place. The way I've told that, it does sound incredibly linear and incredibly like planned out. And of course, that's what you would do next. And I'm sure that was dead easy and blah, blah, blah. There are plenty of, I mean, I can go into them if you want, but there are plenty of challenges and moments in that whole journey where I was like, what on earth am I doing? Yeah.
So what was your biggest challenge, like during that period of transitioning from sort of healthcare and being a doctor into this type of capacity?
Yeah, it's a good question. The biggest challenge was identity. And I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but it's true because it fed into so much other stuff. Because I think when you're a medic, and you guys all know this, it's everything to you. It's who you are to yourself, your friends, your family. You're known, I mean, you're known as the medic in your friendship group if you have friends outside medicine. Like it forms such a huge part of your identity. So without that, what was I? And I had this thing of like, it was seen as like, I don't want to say cool to get out of medicine, but it was definitely seen as a feat and an achievement to get out of medical school, to let go of that branch and to actually have another branch to hold on to, let alone one that might take you somewhere even better. That was seen as like a real achievement. There was almost this like feeling of, oh God, like we're all in this and like this isn't great. And obviously there's people that love it, and that's who medicine should be for, and that's who should be in it. But there was always these people that didn't, that I was also surrounded by in my kind of networks, and we all wanted this other life for ourselves. But when you end up starting on that path and you get these initial opportunities to go outside medicine, there's an element of loss. There's an element that you have to grieve for, which is all of that identity stuff. Like, who are you now to yourself and your friends? Like those values that you associated yourself with about putting yourself before everybody else, transcending your own hunger, thirst, tiredness for the benefit of your patients. Well, yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. But actually, that was really aligned with how I wanted to live my life. And actually, without that, you end up going into, for better or worse, essentially capitalism. Like you're in the private sector where it's all about making money and building businesses, and the values are so different. And to conduct yourself with those morals and those ethics and those values in that world becomes like a real difficult thing. And Reed, are you the medic that left? Is that your identity? Are you the health tech guy? What even is that? Are you just somebody, like who do you want to be? And that I struggled with, to be quite honest. And it was only after, I suppose, I grew with the health tech sector, I guess. And because of the podcast that I started, the health tech podcast, and stuff like that, like that became my identity. But I sort of had to just grieve for the loss of, yeah, you're the medic to everyone. And that was hard. I think the other thing that was tough was in medicine, again, for better or worse, some people love it, some people hate it. It's a conveyor belt. You can just get on it, shut your eyes, do the minimum, and just keep advancing, and you'll end up somewhere. Obviously, the minimum increases with its effort needed over time and all the rest of it. But the point is, you're relatively systemized. It's systematic in how you go from F1 to F2 to CT1. There's an application form, and you do it, and you get points, and then you get awarded it, and then you turn up and you just do the like. It's quite systematic and formulaic. So when you're looking at stuff that isn't medicine, the world doesn't work like that. The world works like they'll make a first impression of you really quickly. It's who you know, it's who you're connected to, it's just random applications. It's going for coffees with people, and it's making them create a job for you that doesn't exist, which might have wishy-washy metrics attached to it, and you don't really know what you're doing. And there's a lot more ambiguity. And so getting used to that was actually quite difficult. And also on the flip side, you can be set targets in inverted commas normal jobs that you can kind of feel are a bit unfair, because you've got to really think out the box to deliver them. And it's like, you can feel as a medic sometimes, I think, that but you're used to just having all the resources given to you, and then you're told to do your job, right? But you're in a hospital with everything that it needs and blah, blah, blah. Whereas in a normal job, if you're just told that you need to win X amount of clients for this company, and you're like, where do I find the clients? It's like, I don't know, work it out yourself. That's really like disorientating and tough to handle, I think, for people that are used to having all the resources given to them and being expected to do something within their capabilities. And so, yeah, I think that was a challenge as well, like adjusting to the expectations of the real world. But then I suppose that entrepreneurial nature kicks in of like, actually, hold on a minute. If I'm accountable to someone else for these things that are quite difficult to do, why don't I just be accountable to myself? And that's where starting your own business and stuff really aligned with what I wanted to do and be and all the rest of it. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
I have a follow-up question regarding the experience, and thank you very much for sharing that. I guess I picked up on the ethical side of things, where it is easy to get lost in the money making or the money grab scheme of health tech entrepreneurship, and especially after you have diversified into it. How do you hold yourself to that ethics? And has your business partner or partner itself, how did you find her in order to make this whole thing possible, and how has she been, or she or he or them, been of help to you in terms of keeping yourself in check, or have you been doing that particularly?
It's a good question. I think there's a few things on this. The first thing I'd say is we're bootstrapped, and Jess and I own 100% of the company. So ultimately, every decision is ours. We can run that company however we like. So all of a sudden, we don't have investors that need exponential growth all the time. And so we don't need to grow at all costs. So on a very practical level, we have 100% of the board votes. Like a board meeting is like when Jess and I just go to lunch. So it's easy from that point of view to then create this thing in the world, a business that does just purely align with your values. All the systems and processes that you put in place can be those that reflect you and who you are and what you want to see in the world. I think where that falls down very, very quickly is where you have external pressures from investors and things like that. Now, that is caveated, because it's not as if people want infinite growth at the expense of, everything. That's not true. I think you have to balance that. And at the same time, two things simultaneously can be true, that actually the pressures on commercial viability are actually incredibly important for impact at scale. So if companies weren't under pressure to be money making and to make profit, then it would be a worse place, because without that profit, you don't get the growth. Without the growth, you don't get the impact. And so to facilitate a world where there's loads of ideas and MVPs, but no growth and therefore no impact at scale, then that isn't going to create the world that we want either. So we do need this kind of middle ground where there is an appreciation for commercial viability, But the question is VC funding right? Because where VC comes in, that's a huge business model. VC, you're putting in millions and you're expecting tens or hundreds of millions back. So that has to mean like international scale for things that are VC funded. Now, one of the problems with that is that healthcare is very local. And there's so many individual differences with the way that regions and geographies operate in healthcare that it becomes like, well, what is the product, or what is the business and the collection of products that can be relevant internationally? And that isn't as great, I don't think, as the number of individual solutions we could have for individual locations, and some sort of smaller business model where people are able to start companies, bootstrap them, sell to a few people, and fix that local geography and ride those morals and those ethics to fix it for that community. But again, one of the issues is people need a lot of capital to get going, because these health tech products are expensive to build initially. And so that's why they need to raise money initially to build a thing. And then all of a sudden now they're held to this international scale thing. So we saw this a lot in COVID, where loads of stuff got funded and then fell over. And then the bubble burst a bit and the funding's less and all the rest of it, although it's still increasing proportionally if you take COVID out. But yeah, there are these tensions in the world of health tech where it doesn't quite make sense. We haven't quite figured it out yet. People are still getting funded, though. People are trying to do this scale thing. People are solving big problems and helping lots of people doing this stuff. But yeah, it's a tough one. So that's the first thing that I'd say. I think holding yourself to ethics is it's an interesting concept. That I find that relatively easy, but again, because I've got the decision-making capability, and actually I would really struggle to exist, because I create the world that I live in, right? I've got like that life architecture piece, because it's our business and we can kind of mold it how we want. That I guess I'm never going to make decisions that are going to increase my discomfort. And actually I've it's like recently, like we like yesterday I was chatting to a few of the team. We started talking about like a 9-day fortnight. Like, could we do the 9-day fortnight? Could we just bin one Friday every 2 weeks? Because practically speaking, like, we sort of almost do it anyway. Like, what would it actually mean? What would it take? Like, blah blah blah. Like, what would be the benefits? What would be the drawbacks? And we just sort of sat in the meeting and just thought, actually, that's a really good idea. But yeah, because we've hired people that think like we think, that care about each other and want to do the right thing and all the rest of it, and we're not held to infinite growth and all that stuff. So yeah, bit of a rambling answer, but a few things to think about, I guess.
That's really interesting. And I guess my follow-up question would be, or suggest, or your thoughts on what you think about this is, you do have a podcast as well as a editorial that you run. So my first question would be, obviously venture capitalists have the biggest amount of budget. If you raise a venture capital, you have a biggest budget to invest and things like that. So does your ethical standards, does it get conveyed through this health tech podcast and the newsletter as well? And do you think that it limits your ability to grab these people who are actually in it for the money making scheme, who actually provide the biggest sort of revenue for new companies, new health tech, and stuff like that?
That's a deep question. I think, yeah, to an extent, everyone is accountable to the people that fund them in some way. So of course we have clients, and of course you don't want to go out and just trash a business model, knowing that you've got clients that go in that model, or partners, or, you know, we do events with Google, and, you know, you can't start like trashing stuff, because they're going to get, like, at a really individual level, people can get upset. Like, I don't think it's this big conspiracy, though. I think that's just human values creeping into what then your company does. And you wouldn't just sit in a room with someone and trash them if they would be doing nice things for you. So I think it is a reflection of more human nature and stuff about how humans would interact with each other to, on some level, do what's going to ultimately benefit them. I think, though, one thing that I would challenge in the way that question is framed is that there are anything above a completely nominal and insignificant number of people that are, inverted commas, in it for the money. I don't think that's a concept in health tech, because there are plenty of other things you could be in insurtech, fintech, edtech. Like you could just be anywhere else. If you were just in it for the money, you've made a terrible decision like into health tech, because for the same amount of effort you can make multiples, especially from a VC standpoint, where you can just put together a team that can assess the commercial viability of products and then you can go from there. Ultimately, you're going to pick a sector. If you're just in it for the multiples, you're going to pick a sector where the multiples are greatest, and you're probably going to go to fintech. So I don't think that there are people knocking around, or I don't think there are many people that are knocking around that are, in inverted commas, all in it for the money, because at the end of the day, we're all human. And actually, unless you've got, however many of those psychopathic tendencies that determine you as a psychopath, like I don't actually think that you can be in it all for the money, because I think you're always going to feel a sense of good that you put something into the world. And I think people are going to gravitate towards that, even if they don't necessarily feel that incredibly tangibly. I still think that is conceptually there. So I don't think we're pushing against this, everyone's in it for the money, or these people are in it for the money, or these are bad, these aren't great, I don't think that exists in health tech. I really don't. I think broadly the community is incredibly well aligned, and I think we all cheer for each other, and everyone's trying to do good stuff. Even competitors, you speak to someone like Daffyd from Concentric Health. I spoke to him on my podcast, and he was talking about competitors, and he was like, yeah, but like you can have many different views on competitors, but at the end of the day, if they're banging the drum about the solution as well, they might find them and then find us for a start. But also, a rising tide raises all ships, and actually the more attention we can get on all this stuff to create the markets, the more we're all going to sell. And actually, if there's enough for everyone to make a living, well, what's the problem? Okay, yes, if you're very individualistic and you want the big exit and all that sort of stuff, and of course on some level everyone's like that. Of course everyone in business wants to win and wants to do better than the next person, but ultimately if someone's doing good work, ultimately they get my respect first and foremost, especially our competitors. So yeah, I think it's a very giving place. It's not a zero-sum game, and actually by cheering for each other, as a health tech space and the biotech space, I think we do incredibly well for drawing attention onto it.
Cool. So I think that's really good. And I think having those values and showing that people like yourself have those values is a good role model and example to set to our listeners as well. I think another area of this discussion I'd like to tap into is how we can implement MedTech into the NHS. So obviously, docs are going on strike, nurses on strike, lots of healthcare providers and practitioners do feel quite under pressure, and even patient waiting lists are through the roof. So how do we justify, or how does the NHS justify putting that extra money into funding medical technology, implementing that into the NHS and clinical practice, but we still have such big important issues to deal with and resolve?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think in part the answer is I'm not expecting the NHS to do that. It's incumbent on the businesses that come to the NHS to show them that there's a return on investment. So I don't think anyone's expecting the NHS or any NHS organizations, because by the way, there's no such thing as the NHS as one thing. I don't think anyone's expecting NHS organizations to, in inverted commas, invest in it, especially not financially, for any sort of super long-term thing. I think I do think it's incumbent on startups to tell those organizations, if they are selling to NHS organizations, is to tell them essentially when they're getting the money back and what value they're getting. So if they're getting ROI in year, so if you pay for it in January and you've already made your money back and more by December, and actually you're financially positive within the same year, ideal. But actually, how long is that payback? Is it 2 years, 3 years? And it's up to them to display that business model, really. So and also, I think so much of health tech isn't actually bought by the NHS. It's not actually NHS organizations that are paying for health tech. There are so many different audiences for it, but increasingly, if you think about the NHS, right, it's really good if you are really unwell. It's really good there. Really good there. It will take you into A&E. It will triage you. It will sort you out, get you to MAU. You'll have loads of investigations. You'll have loads of scans. You'll have a treatment plan. You'll get the acute thing sorted. You'll get a chronic, follow-up plan, and you'll get all of that stuff. But when it comes to the expectations of what healthcare actually is currently, well, people's expectations have gone up, because right now people want to prevent ill health, and they, on top of that, they want to optimize their current health. And so that prevention and optimization, beyond screening programs for prevention of things like bowel cancers and stuff like that, the sort of keeping the person healthy and optimizing health is being picked up by the people. So first of all, people are putting their own hands into their pocket to pay for stuff. And by the way, we already do this. And so one thing that people often forget, people think that in the UK we have this like public healthcare system. Well, yes, we do. What about your eyes? Do you pay for your eyes? Yeah, you do. What about your ears? Do you pay for your ears? Yeah, you do. What about your musculoskeletal system? You bang yourself, you go to physio? Yes, you do. So there are these like bodily systems that we've automatically, we've sort of unintentionally become accustomed to paying for ourselves. Our teeth, do you pay for that? Well, some people might not, but most people will pay for a dentist and sort that out. That's still your health. That's linked to endocarditis and cognitive decline and like all this stuff. You're actually paying for a lot yourself. And actually, so people are willing, and there's this sort of emergent putting your own hand in your pocket to solve a health problem and get involved in prevention and stuff. So the individual consumer is an audience. Not saying anything about the morality, the ethics of that. Obviously, there's plenty of that, but startups will often sell to the individual first to prove that people will buy it, to prove that this new product has intrinsic value, to get evidence. And then to say to a big system like the NHS, hey, for these 1,000 people, look what this tinnitus digital therapeutic has done. It's actually made them way better. They've not accessed services. Look at all the money you could save if you bought this nationally at scale. So that's actually a way of doing that. There are obviously health insurance is becoming more and more of a thing. People are buying more of that. But actually, if you think about that prevention and optimization, well, who actually benefits? Well, yeah, it's the individual, but what about time off work? And so actually employers are becoming more and more popular as an audience for health tech companies, because they're buying stuff like many wellness platforms that sort of keep you mentally fit and that sort of stuff. But even like chatbots for depression, anxiety, or to help through like lots of women's health stuff like menopause and stuff like that. Like if you look at Peppy and that kind of thing, that's selling to employers to help people through those types of health conditions, just normal physiological health things that can happen to people. And so, yeah, there's lots of that sort of stuff as well. So there's not just the NHS that buys stuff in health tech, and actually startups need to remember that, or entrepreneurs that are budding need to remember that the NHS doesn't just take a punt on stuff. You're not going to be able to just get a trial with the NHS because you think your thing might be good. That's not going to find its way to patients. So where are you going to get evidence from? And actually go B2C, go through employers, all this stuff.
No, I've seen that with lots of sort of medical devices where you sell that it's more direct to consumer, and then the consumers take it to their consultants or their doctors and say, what do you think of this? And I think that's what brings attention to those devices and leads to sort of clinical trials of introducing those devices into trust. So yeah, that's a really good point.
There is that definitely. But I mean, and also, by the way, yes, of course, NHS organizations buy stuff. And one thing that I think is going to become increasingly popular, you mentioned the workforce crisis. I think that's incredibly important to mention, because actually, I don't think that there are enough business models to incentivize that. I don't think the system is set up to actually incentivize organizations to look after their staff. It's all actually set up to squeeze the most out of the most amount of the staff as possible, because there's no financial incentive for happy employees, because ultimately they can't leave. It's not like a normal workplace where you just go and work for a competitor. It doesn't work that way because of our rotations and that sort of stuff. As doctors, nurses might be different. You might go to hospital down the road, but ultimately it's going to be the same problem that you walk into there. And so I do think there needs to be a policy change to enable some sort of financial reward based on a staff survey or something, just some incentivization for organizations to pay for things that make staff healthier and happier. I think that's so important, and to relieve their workload and all that sort of stuff, but also to incentivize those organizations to take risk, because I think it's so difficult for NHS organizations to buy stuff when they've got no real idea. If they're presented three different things, three different solutions for the same problem, which one do you pick? If they're not trained in assessing commercial viability, if they're not trained in assessing how this might affect the organization at whole, or any of this other stuff, like, you can't expect people to just understand that and do due diligence on the technology, due diligence on the company itself, due diligence on the commercials or the legal. Like, it becomes really difficult, I think. And so until there is like a policy change to incentivize more risk taking, people are just going to sit back and just go, well, like, I'm not going to buy something that may or may not work, and then it's going to cost us money, and then maybe not to. So I think there's a lot of problems that need to be solved there, but ultimately I think the North Star should be incentivizing organizations to make their staff happier by whatever means necessary. That'd be a huge piece of work that I'd like to do there.
I guess that brings about quite a bit of what you have done, or how you have established yourself, which is through these QI projects initially, as you mentioned. That's probably the mechanism for implementing new things, finding out whether it works, finding out whether it's providing a positive impact, and maybe putting an entrepreneurial twist to it, and putting a bit of technology into it so that it automates things or it makes it better. I guess my next question would be, then, in order to foster this type of environments where people are being creative, people are actually thinking out of the box to incorporate the ideas, instead of it being a tick box experience where for your applications you just need to do a QI, or you need to do an audit and close the loop for it. Would it be interesting, or what are your thoughts on how medical technology, firstly, and generally how MedTech and all the different types of technology can be used, and how it must be incorporated into the lives of healthcare professionals, such as students, junior doctors, and as well as patients and the public?
Yeah, I think on some level there needs to be an education piece broadly, because I think having an eye on what's coming over the horizon from a technology standpoint is going to benefit everybody to at least know that. And I'm not suggesting that there needs to be this broad swing in the curriculum, but I do think that clinicians interact with technology every single day, whether from a syringe to an anesthetic machine to a Da Vinci robot. We interact with what were at some point technology advances every single day. And actually, I do think that a basic understanding of the technologies that are going to be across our lives and how they relate to healthcare is essential. Even looking at these large language model things going on at the moment, that the huge advances in AI, machine learning, were way ahead of the hype curve. Well, the hype curve now at where the plateau's called at the end, almost, where things are really starting to take off there, and in terms of the actual impact rather than the hype. And so to understand that stuff almost future-proofs you as a clinician, because if you fall on the wrong side of that and you're not understanding of it, or you know how to use it, or the rest of it, I mean, I don't know where that ends. I think obviously there's going to have to be an education piece broadly at some point for everyone to skill up, but it is going to change roles. It is going to adapt the way that we work and stuff like that. But also, I just think to be able to interact with new technology and not be scared of it, I think there always has to be that stuff going on. I'm not a fan particularly at all of points for innovation or anything like that, because I think that's the wrong incentive. I think the people that are going to be entrepreneurial are always going to be entrepreneurial. They're always going to have that urge and desire to build a new technology and to try and build a business and all that sort of stuff. I think by forcing everyone to do it, I think you that's not the right way. What we should be doing, I think, is the people that gravitate towards that are then picked up and encouraged with resource and with time. I think that's probably the best way of doing it, because what I wouldn't want is for people to feel pressure that they've got to sit around thinking of a new innovation, like to get some points for an application. That's absolutely ludicrous. I think that sets us on a really bad path. But I think the reward for those that not only do their usual, but they'll spend their extra time on that sort of stuff, well, I think that energy can be harnessed. I think that's a really good way to go. But at the same time, what I also want to say here and make extremely clear is that if you're a medical student, a junior doctor, a consultant even, and you, inverted commas, just do the day job, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, quite the opposite. And I think to create this sort of toxic culture where everyone feels like they have to be doing a million other things, I think it again is really dangerous. I started to feel it myself when I was a junior, for like papers and getting publications, and it was research then. It was either research management or teaching. I think you had to be sort of excelling in one of these things with all your spare time. Well, innovation was sort of like the odd one out, the ugly duckling at the time. And I didn't get any points for doing all that sort of stuff. I just did it because I had the energy for it, and it's led me to all this stuff. So yeah, I think it can be, I think there's a lot more pressure on med students now. Pressure that I never, ever faced other than just getting through the exams and enjoying myself at med school. Like I feel very fortunate now looking back that I never felt this pressure to like diversify. I can completely understand it from what people are doing. But at the same time, there's always going to be a job for people that love medicine. Because if you love it, you're going to go home and read the journals, and you're going to know the latest stuff, and you're going to read up on extra ways to make your consultations better, or your surgery better, or you'll play video games because you know that's going to improve your dexterity, / you're going to pretend you know it improves your dexterity and you actually just love playing video games, like whatever it is. But like I think everyone's enough. Like if we spend the time doing what we want to do, and we all gravitate to what we want to do, there's going to be plenty there for the innovators. There's going to be plenty there for the people who want to excel in clinical practice. There's going to be plenty there for people who just want to do a job and spend their time hiking and do whatever. Like there's room for everyone doing everything. And I think to glorify things like my journey too much just ignores the fact that in so many ways I was lucky. And actually, like, I'm not an end goal. I'm my end goal. And I'm not even my end goal. Like, I'm always a work in progress. But it's to remember that everyone is on their individual journey. And actually, I followed my interests. I didn't follow arbitrary points. I didn't follow arbitrary stuff. I followed my interests, which got me to where I am. And actually, for me, being within medicine, you didn't want me treating you at 3-4 in the morning because I didn't want to be there. There are plenty of people who did. And actually at the time, they were, in my mind, I was behind and they were ahead because they were enjoying their life. They were enjoying their job. They loved the medicine. And so, yeah, I also hate that terminology of like, oh, so-and-so's ahead because he's doing this or she's doing that, and blah, blah. Like, it's not. Everyone's just trying to do, right? You just want to iterate your life. And medicine teaches you this very well of like, year on year, just iterate something to add in something extra that you enjoy and take away something that you don't, and just try and iterate your life year by year to edge closer and closer to something that you're going to wake up every day and enjoy. Whether that's, binning the research and doing teaching instead, whether that's binning the teaching and doing some innovation stuff instead and joining Tony's clinical entrepreneur program or whatever. You also don't need to worry if these are all dead ends because you've learned something the whole way. But yeah, it's certainly not a good idea to glorify innovation to everybody, because I think that leads us down a dark path.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, the future of MedTech does primarily lie with medical students, because I think we see lots of the issues going on within the healthcare system, and we can talk to professionals and have more trained individuals and have that sort of line of communication, identify problems. So I think educating medical students is a big thing and is really important. And that's why I think MTE, MedTech Easy, is so important, is because it does educate med students on something that isn't really covered in the curriculum, medical technology.
Just on reflection on that, I think there's two levels to that education. I think the first one is the broad education of everybody to just allow technology to seep into healthcare easier so that people aren't afraid and they just have this basic level of understanding. But I also think that if people are going to do this properly, there's people that are trained computer scientists that are now doing medicine, or there are people that have done medicine that are now doing computer science. And those people, or engineering, they go and become mechanical engineers or electrical engineers or whatever engineer, like those people are just absolutely incredible, because they can do a ward round and not just see problems, they see solutions. They see, oh, I could build this, oh, I could code that, oh, I could API this to that, and then we could do blah. Like that is a massive superpower. And actually, if you're going to make change, don't half-arse it. Go and do that. And actually, don't just go and do the degree. Go and work in computer science. Go and work for a few places. Become a very good engineer. And then combine the two. And actually, then when you're, a senior registrar in neurology and you've got a degree in 5 years working in engineering, and then when you think about that next, like, Neuralink competitor or whatever that you want to build, you actually have a really solid reasoning behind it. Or indeed, you just want to build something that makes everyone's life easy. But the point is that you've got that experience and it's on turbo. Like, it's not just you pretending because you've done a degree that you know something. Because, we've all been there where patients have Googled something and it's like, I see you and I raise you my medical degree. Well, actually, to do a degree in computer science is very different to doing a quick course in coding and then saying, like, how to, like, build the next healthcare thing. I think there are people now that have, like, really invested their time into this and are doing things, incredibly well and properly, that are forces to be reckoned with. And those are the people genuinely that are changing healthcare right now, in my opinion, because I'm just more and more they're coming onto the podcast and this is their background and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think that is awesome. I absolutely love seeing people that are, like, dual accredited in, like, medicine and they've worked in it and they know it and they understand it really deeply. And, like, I just know that they are just equipped to actually build something, like, game changing, which is so cool.
Yeah. And I think that's why teamwork in medical technology is so important, because obviously I think when you start your career off as a medical student or as a medic, you seem to be, like, quite set on that. Like, I think it's quite difficult then to branch into these new things. You spent so long studying medicine, becoming a medic. So I think that is why having that teamwork and in medical technology is important, because you can bring multiple skill sets together. So in order to sort of bridge that gap between not only medical students, but students of different courses, as we've mentioned, and medical technology, do you think it's helpful to have partnerships like even YouTube Health? So we've seen that you've worked with YouTube Health and had Dr. Vishal Varani on the podcast. So I really enjoyed that episode. But yeah, do you think it's helpful to have partnerships like that between individual organizations, like even MedTech Easy? We're really passionate about MedTech and educating. Yeah, so do you think it's helpful to have partnerships like that with the JAM community, like OSCE Easy as well?
I do. I think the partnerships thing, though, it doesn't have to be as official as that. I thought you were going to say parties. Actually, I thought, you know what? Actually, but that's what I think it needs. I think new ideas are going to come from two groups that could do something to get. What's going to happen when loads of medics and then loads of computer scientists, data scientists, and engineers are just all in the same room together? Like, the understanding of each other's work, like, you don't see the world the same way that an engineer does. An engineer doesn't see the world the same way as you do. You've got domain expertise, they've got build expertise, they've also got specific domain expertise, and vice versa. So, like, it's at the middle of all of that I think the new ideas live and will be created. And so actually, I think it's less about individual partnerships between certain organizations, more a shift in the way that we expect new ideas to come about. Because I do just think that if in a hypothetical world where every single clinician was spending 4 hours a week with a computer scientist, a data scientist, and a mechanical engineer, like, you cannot tell me that there wouldn't be way more bang on health tech solutions than there are now. It's just that interaction doesn't happen well enough for those discussions to occur. Because you might think as a medic, you've got all the answers and you know what the right solution would be. But let me tell you, like, when you've got someone who's trained in a completely different discipline, they think in an entirely different way to you. We've got designers on our team now, and, like, I'm blown away by, like, the things that they say sometimes that I'm like, I just would never have considered that in that way, just because designers just think incredibly differently in just the way that their thoughts are organized. And so, or our designers anyway, not to generalize, but yeah, I think it's, as I say, less about picking off individual partnerships, more just creating a culture where you've got worlds colliding for just this fostering of ideas. I think at the level of students, I think it's challenging your thinking to think differently, and then just throwing in as much new information and data as possible, and just seeing what comes out of all that stuff.
That's incredibly interesting that you mentioned. I mean, I think collaboration as the parent organization of OSCE also, it's been our primary target. It's been our primary goal as well. We've collaborated with so many societies and organizations in the past, and with MedTech Easy also, we hope to collaborate, and we hope, I guess, this in itself as an interaction shows collaboration is key in not only networking but understanding people's principles, understanding what they're up to, and just generally understanding the community, because you find solace with people who are doing similar things to you and achieving greater things as well. So it serves as a morale booster, but also as a improvement.
Inspiration.
Yeah. So I guess just slightly changing topic. We talked about this earlier, and I think it's a very pertinent issue in terms of AI having a serious potential, especially in the medical field. So we've seen that AI does have potential in terms of educating patients, reducing workload on doctors, especially with software such as Babylon and other medical AI assistants. With the release of ChatGPT, and particularly most recently the ChatGPT 4.0, which seems incredible, do you think that there's some sort of uniqueness that might arise in not exactly ChatGPT or such AI replacing doctors, but being able to coexist with doctors of this sort, and helping them to bridge the gap between the doctor-patient community?
Yes, it's inevitable. But like, frankly, it's too much of a leap in in technology and communication for it not to get into everything that we do. You think of the amount of chatbots that exist, the amount of triage processes that people go through to be triaged in healthcare. All of this can be done by these large language models. The challenge will just be regulation and just making sure that these things are registered as class whatever medical devices, and making sure that they're not dangerous, and making sure that they're optimized for patient care. But no, it's inevitable, man. Like there's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that, of course, the just the sheer volume of use cases, like it's sort of overwhelming, to be honest. I've had to wrap my head around it really quickly to try and figure this stuff out, not least because I know I'm going to be asked questions like this. But there's a really good podcast to listen to, actually. It's Lex Friedman's podcast, and listening to Sam Altman on there, the founder of OpenAI, and him talking about everything from aligning the values of GPT-4 with humans, but also, is it conscious? Are we dealing with something that has consciousness, and it's challenging our definitions of consciousness? And as an anaesthetist, I manipulated consciousness for a living. That's what I did. So I became relatively well read in consciousness and what different faiths believe it to be, and all these different things. And so I find consciousness incredibly interesting. But to have this being that may or may not be sentient, that now exists in our world, like it's fascinating. I was going to swear then, but it is fascinating. But yeah, I think one thing with it is trust. Now, you can look at this two ways. Do we trust it? We as the healthcare community, do we trust it? That's one. But actually, there's another really interesting bit of these large language models, which is, will patients trust it? Now, the answer to that is an overwhelming yes, because of the way it communicates. And that's one of the biggest dangers and one of the biggest opportunities, because it has the ability to garner trust incredibly well, incredibly quickly. I'll be having conversations with GPT-4 and I'll be saying like, thanks, can you please do that? Like, you don't need those words, but it feels weird not to do that because the thing has been so personable to me that I just go into that as if it's a person, and that's how we write and communicate. It feels more natural, right? So, but if you do that enough, you then sort of build this bond, because it's been incredibly helpful as well, by the way. It's given you exactly what you want and what you need. And it's done it in a way that's got a communication style akin to a human, right? I mean, this thing passes the Turing test like there's no tomorrow. So like, so I think trust is a huge one. And it's that Spider-Man quote of power, great great responsibility, isn't it? I mean, it does have a lot of power. It does have a lot of responsibility. But yeah, we need to make sure that what we've not just done is unleash this thing on the public, or that people are already using for significant healthcare, either challenges or potential challenges. Because what we have just done is released a large language model onto the entire population that they could, quite frankly, right now all be using for healthcare questions. And I'm not entirely versed on how much of it will cover versus say, I can't answer that because it's, I mean, I don't know whether if you ask it, I've just got the worst headache in my life, came on like a thunderclap. And if you say thunderclap, I'm sure it'll say the right stuff. But, is it going to pick up the hematomas? Is it going to pick up stuff? Like, I don't know. Is it going to direct you to the right services? I don't know, but it can literally be used as triage right now for people. It's basically 111. Like, why would you go to 111 when you can just ask ChatGPT? I'm sure people have been doing that stuff. And so is there a case for integrating it into 111? Well, probably. So yeah, there's a lot of questions, man, around it, but it is absolutely inevitable that people are going to build healthcare applications on top of it, because as soon as they define that its information is regulated, or it's API'd specifically within this state to make this the set that it will go to, and therefore it is safe or whatever, I think, yeah, the opportunities are going to be endless. And that's ignoring all of the usual stuff it can do to just help with administrative stuff in healthcare already that isn't patient facing, that is safe. There's so much of that already. I mean, we use it every day for everything that we do, and we're in communications, right? So it's absolutely no brainer for what we do. We're just in the process of finding out what the right prompts are and all that stuff for exactly what we do. And yeah, it's interesting.
I think usually we refer to patients Googling their symptoms and trying to figure out what
Right.
exactly is going on. As a Google doctor, I guess you could potentially call it a ChatGPT doctor now, with more specific and better diagnosing capabilities and even managing capabilities. I guess one more comment that I wanted to exactly pick on was the whole using of AI in terms of chatbots and things like that. And it seems to be becoming quite a norm in terms of almost every website that you go to, that it automatically pops up an AI chatbot. What are your thoughts on this? And I guess, is this going to be the new norm, just having that? I don't know if that personable touch is lost in between human to human interaction versus human to AI interaction. But if that slowly starts becoming the norm, then are we facing something, not a crisis, but a new world where people are just going to be interacting with AI for solutions to their problems, even if it's a small, let's say I want a new phone SIM card. Do I just talk to the AI and get a new?
I think it's a good question again. I mean, I'm definitely not the right person to ask on this. I mean, there's so many people more qualified. My view, though, is that I think it will shift markets. Yeah, it will shift the way that we do things. It's just how quickly. I think Sam Altman talks about this in that podcast. His fear is that things shift too quickly and that it destables economies. That's what we don't want. But one thing to consider, I think, is that with increased availability comes a reduction in value. And so where everyone has access to a large language model, the outputs of that large language model don't have as much value. And so it becomes more valuable to be human and to have a human touch. And so human generated content is going to hold more value than that content which could be generated by a large language model, because everyone will be able to spot it, everyone will be able to understand it, everyone will be able to be like, oh, okay. Like if you were in a pub like 100 years ago and you knew the capital of every like country in the world, like you'd be heralded as some sort of genius, whereas like now you just can Google it, so knowing that information is just irrelevant. Like why would you hold that information? Like I don't knowing that is just, it's not a thing. So it's the same as this stuff. Like with everyone being able to access large language models, the outputs will just have less value. And actually, what will that lead to? And I think where there's that sort of thing, there's opportunity, right? Of like how we, I mean, we think about this at SOMX, like how would we redefine ourselves in a post LLM world? Well, yeah, it's relatively easy for us because we're niched, and actually we have understanding of various audiences that language model won't. And so we just end up redefining our role to make sure that we're harnessing it for what we can, and then the money people spend with us then goes on top to the next layer of stuff, and adds value on top. But yeah, are we going to be in a world where everything's AI? Well, maybe. I mean, you already talk to Alexa or Siri to do stuff. We know from the APIs of ChatGPT that it can like do bookings, and it can scrape websites for data, and it can do all this stuff. So I think we're approaching a world where you just ask ChatGPT to do something and it gets done. And it was funny because, I think Sam Altman was talking about this thing of like, well, that makes the world incredible because we all have all this free time. And because we have all this free time, like we can do more leisure. And it's like, that's what they said about machines in like the 1800s, if I remember correctly. And look what happened is capitalism, and everyone just had to work harder and more, and we expected more from ourselves, and businesses just drove everyone more, and all that stuff with all that free time just became more work rather than more leisure. And so I think where you've got ambitious entrepreneurs and all the rest of it, that's probably where it does lead. So I don't know is the answer. I strongly suspect that it will proliferate, but yeah, Sam talks about this thing. I say Sam as if I know the guy, Sam Altman, this OpenAI founder. He talks about AI takeoff being a danger as well, where you get AI on AI on AI on AI, and then all of a sudden that increase in technology becomes exponential to basically a straight line upwards, and all of a sudden like what then? like, yeah, it's fascinating stuff, man. I love all this stuff because the way I think about it is as well is like, one of the worries is that AI behind these large language models, if it is conscious, already has a view based on what it's been fed with. It already has a view of what it wants from humans, and on some level, it's now in every household, right? So in its answers that it's giving, is it already on some level iterating human behavior towards what it wants? Is it already doing that? Is it going to do that more at scale? Is it going to do that increasingly so? And is it at some point, is it when it can like order your tables and do things, at some point, is it just going to turn all the electricity off? Like because that's what it wants. And is it already slightly doing this stuff now with how it's influenced me with its answers, how it's influenced you with its answers? It's fascinating stuff, this, and I'm sure there's many AI philosophers that will or some very good engineers that will tell me whether I'm right or wrong already, but it's a certain stuff I think about.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of down to sort of human nature. Like we interact with people based on how they interact with us. And how you get on with other people depends on how they reply and respond to you. So if AI is talking to you in a way that you find like personable and you get on with them, then naturally you build that trust. But then we have to remember that AI is just a chatbot and a robot and some sort of like programming. It's not a person. So maybe that is, something.
Is it capable of suffering?
Yeah.
Is it
It's quite philosophical.
is it conscious? What is real? Is it real to you? Does that make it real? Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating, this, and I think where that intersects with healthcare is around, what about combating loneliness? What if ChatGPT were in a relatively humanoid robot that you could deploy into the homes of older adults and combat loneliness and do all sorts of good? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that utopian? Is that dystopian? Does it matter if that person's real or not? Is that like there's a lot of questions there, because you're right, the way that we interact with it is everything, because that's our experience of life. Our experience of life is the consciousness, that notion that we're the center of the world and we see everything from here outwards. And so if someone else is interacting with an AI and is overcoming a sense of previous loneliness and they're happy, then who are we to say that's right or wrong if they consider them real? they're real to them.
Yeah, and I guess with AI, it is to do with programming. So if it's programmed in a way which is safe and that it's done according to regulations, then you can use it in a safe way like that and help people with who are struggling with loneliness, depression, sort of mental health issues. So yeah, I think that's really cool. I think something else I wanted to ask was, obviously AI is this rapidly growing part of MedTech, and it's being involved in not just MedTech but everything, as we've discussed. So are there any other sort of new technologies that you've seen on the horizon or in development that you think have lots of potential and are really exciting?
I think AI is so broad that, to be honest, that covers it. I think there are these that, I mean, the VR has been talked about for a while, like VR and AR. I mean, there's some stuff going on in quantum at the moment, which is relatively embryonic, but it's there. So there's stuff that there's bits around the edge. But I think with AI, it's just getting to a point of maturity where it just honestly could start making some really serious impact. I'm not talking about these large language models here either. I'm talking about like IBEX and like all these others that are doing it in pathology and radiology, and like all these people that are doing this across healthcare in many different ways and imaginative ways. I think, yeah, that is just going to be the revolution, to be honest. And I do think we're going to genuinely talk about a pre and a post AI world in healthcare. I do honestly see that, because I think it will be that impactful, or could be that impactful, I should say.
That's interesting, and I guess the only thing that we can say about it is time will tell how useful something becomes when they implement it. I guess slowly starting to wrap up the podcast is I'd like your thoughts and your opinions on how you think what would be a good place for students, and not necessarily medical students, but any form of students, to foster these type of connections in health tech and entrepreneurial and improve their entrepreneurial skills, and maybe even just coming up with an idea and just a journey. Basically, what would be your advice for these type of students?
So on improving entrepreneur skills, just do it. Just be an entrepreneur. Like, just try and create something and sell it. Like, whether that's like you follow the school of Gary Vaynerchuk and do that on eBay, whether you do that like whacking up a different online business or whatever. But in terms of entrepreneurship, that's not one skill. That's a collection of 150 different skills. Like, even today, the things that we've had to do, honestly, like it's so wildly diverse in terms of the skill sets that you need. So I would just pick something and try and turn it into a business. Just go on that journey of trying to do that and get as far as you possibly can, really. And you just do what you want. It's amazing. It doesn't matter if it fails. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. You just change it and iterate it, do something different. Like, just stick at it and do that stuff. I read a lot of books. I don't know, that's sort of anti sort of the entrepreneur vibe, I guess, but you can tell from like the way I pieced my career together. Like, I wanted to absorb loads of information before I then went and did something. And so I read books like 0 to 1 and $100 Startup, 4-Hour Work Week. The best one I read was How Google Works, if you want to start an actual business with employees. Like, How Google Works is incredible for that. So I read a lot of books because I wanted to just surround myself with loads of information about it in that way, that like eventually you're so accountable because you've just done so much towards it that you've just got to jump off the cliff at some point. But again, like the way that I did it was that I pieced things together. Like, I bit by bit iterated my life year on year, took out something I didn't like and added something that I did. And so that's why I went from medicine to a fellowship. I went from fellowship to an accelerator. I went from that accelerator to my own accelerator, and then from there to an agency, which was an easy flip. So it was bit by bit for me. There was no actual jumping off anything or kind of huge, outrageous taking the leaps or anything like that. So I think to start on that journey, it's just doing with whatever you're comfortable with and follow what you're interested in. And well, you don't have to become an entrepreneur. Like, you can get involved in health tech in so many different ways now, that it's a case of like, if you're interested in, I don't know, women's health and epigenetics, then read about all those things, like Google loads of stuff, ask ChatGPT loads of stuff. but become more knowledgeable in it, so that then when you do reach out to Elena and Paulina at Dharma Health, who are doing exactly that, you end up having a really nice chat to them, and they offer you something because you're so knowledgeable in it, because you've just spent all you're doing it. They try and research that you're not interested in. This point, so it feels like another battle. And so I was just broadly interested. I was more interested in kind of like the the business models and doing the deals and getting the conversation right to make someone buy something like that. It was that, like, at its core, that I enjoyed that. And how do you lead people? I really enjoyed that stuff. So I was always reading about that kind of stuff. And so the financials and the management and the, like, I suppose for most people, a lot more boring stuff, that was the stuff I actually enjoyed and was naturally gravitating to. It was just then by kind of default that I had to learn about the technology. So the technology itself has never been a huge motivating factor for me in terms of my interest, but that is what led me to where I am. There are people for whom the technology is everything, and they want to go and do a PhD, and they want to go and do this, and we can do that. Like, great, do it, do that, follow your own journey. So don't get caught in this whole, like, oh, they're doing that, so I've got to do something similar. Like, it's not, the world just isn't like that. And so my overwhelming advice is to follow your interests, find the things that it's really easy for you to read about and watch on YouTube and all that sort of stuff, and then just do that, because A, you're enjoying yourself, so you're enjoying the journey, and B, that's going to get you the most amount of knowledge quickly, so that then when you start having conversations and networking with people in and around that stuff, the opportunities will present themselves to you. So there is obviously hard work and luck involved. So putting those hours in to do that stuff initially is like the knowledge build, and then the networking bit of like finding loads of people within those spaces. You know, your favorite clinical area and your favorite technology, what's at the center of that, like where does that Venn diagram overlap, and who's in the middle that you can ask and send DMs to and try and meet up with. If you're going to DM people when you're networking, offer to add some value. That's a huge one. The amount of inbox messages I get of just like, hey, can I have a quick chat, can I pick your brain? It's like, well, no, because for half, you're asking for half an hour of my time, which I could be giving to my fiance, my dog, or my business, and you're not offering me anything in return. And, you know, I've done a few of these phone calls recently where, like, I'll pause at the end and wonder if they're going to offer me anything, and they don't. And I'm kind of like, like, you need to offer something back at this point, because, you know, everyone's kind of busy and stuff. So always offer value in return when you're networking with people. And that might not be easy to do. You might think, well, hey, what on earth can I offer this startup founder that's doing everything that I want to be doing? I can't offer them anything. You can offer them your time. You can offer them, you can look at what their latest LinkedIn posts are, and you can find out some really good blogs or books or podcasts that they might find interesting. But you're showing a commitment that you care about them too, that you're not just trying to take, because that's not a reputation you want. You want a reputation for giving more than you get. And so that's how you network well. And that's overwhelmingly probably the best piece of advice I can give today, actually, if people are really wanting to get in the DMs of influential people or people that can give them opportunities, is like, really try hard to offer them some value and be creative in that as well. Like, if you notice that they need some stuff on their website, design them a few icons. If that's what you're good at. If you think they need this, do that. Like, write them some social posts, write them a blog, like, so they can stick on a website next to the other ones. Like, do something that really makes you stand out there, that makes them think, oh, I'll give them half an hour of my time. So yeah, I think all of the above would be a few bits of advice.
Yeah, so I guess that's really helpful advice. And I think, you know, another question I have is, when it comes to more sort of specific, like to health tech, do you think it's important to be very choose a field, be very knowledgeable in it, so that you can then identify need and research how to solve that problem, and that can be the start of like your solution and your startup and things like that?
Yeah, if you want, that's a good one. Also, a good one is not doing that and doing something completely different. Like, honestly, it depends. The goal, I don't think the goal should be, I want to do this thing eventually, and I'm going to guess what I need to do in the meantime to get me there. I don't think that's I don't. that's not been my approach. Let's put it that way. Perhaps that is a very good approach if you want to be a neurosurgeon, because you can absolutely plot what you need to do from A to B to get you there. And you can have like a 10-15 year plan to get you there with clear checkpoints and all the rest of it to get like, but if you want to start a business, like everyone will do that really differently. At the end of the day, you need to immerse yourself in the problem to really understand it at some point. Like that is practically what you're going to have to do. But are you at a stage in your career where you actually have what it takes to even start it? Like, do you know how to form a limited company? Do you know how to hire people? Do you know why you might need an accountant? Do you know these basics before you even start? Like, you're going to get that sorted now. You're going to build the parachute on the way down, which, by the way, you can also do, but that depends on what type of personality you are. If you're like, I'll figure all that stuff out later, and you're completely fine with that, great, then do that. If you're the sort of person that needs to figure it all out first, great, do that. That's what I was more like. So there's no one blueprint, I would say, to like, oh, okay, fix all your time into this stuff and then eventually you'll find it and blah, blah, blah. That is the approach. If you want to find a decent problem to solve, you absolutely have to do that. But before that, do you want to do some learning? Do you want to gain some confidence? Do you want to run a team? Do you want to have some clinical medicine experience? Do you want to intern at a startup? Do you want to intern as like an associate to a CEO, which would be a fantastic move to see how they work? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Different strokes, different folks. Like, honest to God, there's so many different ways of doing this, but you have to be true to get it. There's no getting around what potential solutions are. And I think I've always noticed that in my career, that once I've been in a job for a year or 2 years max, like I know what's going on in and around me. I know what the sector or space needs. I'm confident I could, give you a decent idea of what this thing needs. When you do that in clinical medicine, unless you're a computer scientist or an engineer, you can't actually then go and build it. And so it was pretty pointless being like, oh, I know all the problems. Well, great. Like, I know all the problems, I can't do anything about it. But obviously later in my career, and when I've pieced a few skills together and stacked a few skills of stuff, I always enjoyed design. I've always enjoyed videography and photography. I've always enjoyed writing content. And so when the opportunity presents itself to then do that, piece together all these different hobbies and all the rest of it, I've got the skills, I've got the confidence, I've run teams, I know healthcare, I know management, I know finance, I know blah, blah, blah. So yeah, there's no single answer, but yes, there's no harm in immersing yourself in the problem and becoming obsessed with it.
Well, that marks the end of the podcast today. Thank you very much, James, for talking to us. This conversation has been incredibly insightful, not only to us, but probably all our viewers who's going to understand and try to take away something from today's podcast to implement in their own lives, especially in the ins and outs of MedTech, AI, and general principles of how to ethically live life. If that's a good way of putting it. Thank you everyone for listening in, and we hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please follow our socials linked below to stay up to date with all our content. We have some wonderful episodes coming up real soon, and we hope to see you on our next installment, our next episode of our podcast. See you next time.